Добрий день, мене звати Raissa Dzulynsky. My name is Raissa Dzulynsky. Today, I'll be interviewing Michael Bociurkiw, our second alumni of the SUSK Alumni video series. Michael is a global affairs analyst, speaker, and journalist. Thank you for joining us. We'll start with our first question is, where did you go to university and what did you study?
Okay, well, first of all, good to be with you, and thank you for inviting me. It's always an honor and a pleasure, and everyone listening out there, support alumni initiatives is really, really important. So I went to university actually where my father taught, which was Carleton University in Ottawa, and I actually applied to go into journalism, and I was told that my marks weren't good enough, so they shuttled me off to the arts department where they had a program called mass communication. And I always have this saying that I developed as I grew older is never take no for an answer. So I told myself, darn, anyway, I'm going to show them. So we'll get to that in a minute of what I'm doing now. But actually, mass communications was really good for me because it taught me a whole range of things, sociology, statistics, you name it. So at the end of the day, it was better than taking journalism. But I think I set the record for taking the longest number of years to do a BA because I was so involved with SUSK because I loved it. So I said, I don't care, so what would happen? And it would infuriated my parents. The year would start with a full load of courses and then I would withdraw because I just couldn't balance the workload. But at the end of the day, we got the degree. And I also supplemented with credits from Columbia University in New York and the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And then I also picked up a certificate in television news at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism in New York. It was a summer program. So that was basically my formal education.
That's very interesting. And we can see in all the student articles that you've written that you were very involved.
That was good training for me early on. And by the way, we also did I think you're going to ask me about my Ukrainian Students Club activity. Of course, I was a member of the Carleton University Ukrainian Students Club. And at that time, we had a radio show called Nash Holos at CKCU-FM, the best campus radio station on the planet. And we do that once a week. And it actually got Best Public Affairs Program Award 1 year. So we really put a lot into it and we were so proud of it. So a lot of my journalism training I got doing that kind of stuff and writing for a student.
That's cool. So the next question is, what was your involvement in SUSK?
So I actually got involved in SUSK before I left high school, because in those years we had grade 13 in Ontario. That's why everyone from my era is superbly smart, because we had 13 years of school in Ontario. Either that or we were dumber. I don't know which one it was, but I was, elected as vice president of SUSK. I think it was VP culture in grade 13, 1980. And then I got more involved. And then I became president. I was the president in 1982. I got elected and then reelected in 1983. So served 2 years then. But the real involvement began in, the USK and at Carleton University. And that's where I really became familiar with what SUSK was.
Very interesting. Cool. Thank you. Next question, you've discussed this a little bit, but feel free to elaborate. But what was your involvement in your USO?
So our USO, because it was Ottawa, there was always something going on involving politics, involving the community. When I became involved formally in SUSK, the Soviet Union, of course, was still there, but we were still dealing with political dissidents, in the Gulag and things like that. In fact, my youth, a lot of it was spent in front of the then Soviet embassy in Ottawa protesting for people like Valentin Moroz. We were part of the push to get the Helsinki Accords passed. So whether you liked it or not, you were really socialized into this kind of hardcore activism. And, we look back and we thank our parents for that. But that got us really plugged into the community. So by the time we became university students, community of the Hromada was very supportive of us because we were very very plugged in and activated. And then also I would go, for example, to a lot of SUSK conferences across the country. A lot of fun was going to the Cook congresses then in Winnipeg. That's where Cook was based. And we were real troublemakers as SUSK because we would press for more representation. We would basically tell them, they're becoming a dinosaur organization. They need to adapt. And we also got them to do things like, respect parliamentary procedure during their congresses. So we were very, very well known for troublemakers, but at the same time, we had a lot of fun.
I'm going to go off script here quickly. You mentioned protests in front of the Soviet embassy. As students now, obviously, we don't know anything about that, or we know little about that time and what it was like. Curious if you can expand on that.
Yeah, sure. Well, a lot of it was, the persecution of Ukrainian dissidents, Ukrainian political prisoners who were more often than not sent to the Gulag, and they spent a long time there behind bars, and Leonid Plush, Valentin Moroz, people like that, slowly drip, 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 they would be released. But I think a lot of it had to do with our constant pressure, protesting not only in front of the then Soviet embassy, but also Parliament Hill, letter writing campaigns. In SUSK, we met with a lot of MPs, a lot of cabinet ministers. So it was totally a different era. And we were very laser focused on that specific issue because it was so important. Persecution of not only political dissidents, but of religion in then Ukraine. So it was something that kept us very activated, very creative in terms of everything from letter writing campaigns to placards to getting on TV programs and talking about it a lot to the general Canadian public. So it was a mesmerizing time, really.
That's really interesting. It's interesting that, back in around the 1980s, you were doing things like that. We actually ran a postcards for prisoners campaign.
Yep, great.
A couple, like last year, 2 years ago, for Ukrainian political prisoners as well. Next question is, what is your current occupation?
Unemployed. Just kidding. So I'm I'm kind of a self-made global affairs analyst. So previously I was spokesperson for the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine based in Kiev. I arrived there in 2014, shortly after the illegal annexation of Crimea or Crimea. And then shortly after my arrival, trouble seems to follow me wherever I go. Shortly after my arrival, Donetsk and Luhansk were occupied by Russian-backed proxies, if you want to call them that. And so I started my career as a journalist, summers of the Globe and Mail, things like that. And then it took me to Winnipeg and then to Asia. And then right after 9/11, actually, I became involved with UNICEF. And we can talk about that a little bit more if you want, but it really put me on the other side of the camera or the microphone as a spokesperson. I served in Tajikistan, the former Soviet Republic was my first posting. And then they threw me in, then I was as a consultant, but then they threw me in as a staff member. My first staff posting was the most difficult posting on the planet. Why? Because that was in Jerusalem. So we were dealing with the occupied Palestinian territories. So whenever I would open my mouth, I'd either offend the Palestinians or the Israelis or both. But it was really, really good training for me. And from there, I went to a number of other postings. And then in Geneva as global spokesperson, that was great. And then I went to work for the United States Fund for UNICEF for a year and UNICEF Canada for a year. And then left UNICEF, and then fell into in 2014, as I said, with the OSCE, and that really made me well known as a spokesperson, but also as a kind of analyst. When Malaysian Airlines MH17 was shot out of the skies over eastern Ukraine in July 2014, I was on the every news cycle almost 24/7 for many, many weeks at a time. It was an honor to fill that position, but it was also very tiring, stressful, but it really honed my skills as someone who can go in front of the camera and speak right off the bat. So after I left the OSCE, I thought, I want to regain my voice because with the OSCE, we represented 57 member states, including Canada, US, Russia, Ukraine. And I always had to speak, not trying to offend any of those 57 members. It was very difficult. When I left the OSCE and doing what I'm doing now as a global affairs analyst, I can actually say what I want. I can say it's actually, I can say very upfront that it's actually Russia who has taken over Eastern Ukraine, has occupied it, and this is why it's wrong. I'm also now a contributor to CNN Opinion, which I have to say I'm immensely privileged to be part of that team. I'm a freelance contributor, but we kind of, they assign some stories to me, and then I come up with ideas too. So I write about everything from Hong Kong to Ukraine to what's happening in Minsk to right now, actually, as we speak, I'm working on a piece on the escalating conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh in the Caucasus. Why should the world care? Why is this important? That type of thing. And then finally, on the side, I'm also a speaker. I'm represented by 2 speakers bureaus in London, England, and I'm a contributor to Globe and Mail Opinion. So all of that keeps me pretty busy. But ironically, when the lockdown happened from COVID, I was kind of in my element because I worked from home anyway. So it was very natural for me to work from home for days at a time without seeing anybody. So that worked very well. Oh, and finally, I am working on a book on smartphone and social media addiction called Digital Crack, which is probably going to be renamed Digital Pandemic because of what's happened.
Definitely have to look out for that book. That was very impressive. Definitely did not have a boring career.
True.
Lots of interesting opportunities. Next question was, how do you think SUSK helped you in advancing your career and or personal development?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I was actually very shy when I was young, believe it or not, and kind of an introvert. But I really was like a spark plug that got lit, or a firecracker when I got, well, even before I got out of high school, but in my closing years of high school. And the Ukrainian community really nurtured me in that regard, as I was talking about the protests and activism and things like that. So, but SUSK particularly taught me a lot of skills, among them negotiation. We had to negotiate with a wide range of people, not only the heads of the Hromada, but for example, different student unions around the world. The activism is self-explanatory, really. We also, in terms of activism and negotiation, we helped, they may take some issue with my version of history, but I think we helped reactivate the Ukrainian Students movement in the United States. The SUSK equivalent is called SUSTA. And in my first years of SUSK, they were very, very dormant. But for whatever reason, we kind of thought it'd be good to have, connections and events, what have you, lobbying efforts with our counterparts in the United States. So that actually worked really well, and they even ended up coming to a few of our congresses, I remember. I talked a little bit about the community engagement, and that really helped develop me. But I especially like going to those congresses and really putting forward forceful arguments, doing interviews, things like that was really good. And then in the summer of 1982, we did something that was really, really cool. So 10 years or so earlier, in the 1970s, was something called Video SUSK. I mean, this was a very, very talented group of SUSK members, Mariko Hurko, Halle Kuchmi, Ivan Fitsan, who got government funding, community funding, and went across Canada and did videos about the Ukrainian community. We thought we would do the same thing in 1982, and it was called Multicultural Media Skills Development Project. We got quite a big sum of money from then Multiculturalism Canada. We got some Ontario government funding, and we even got, believe it or not, Via Rail passes for all the project workers to travel across Canada. And basically what we did is interviews with outstanding Ukrainian Canadians from across the country, even not outstanding and just not well-known people, but we went coast to coast to the Maritime provinces, where there are Ukrainians who are not that visible, all the way to British Columbia. As far as Vancouver Island, where we interviewed, for example, Peter Shostak, the well-known artist. I'll give you another example. When we were in BC, we interviewed the Ukrainian Professional Business Club of Vancouver because they were in this legal battle against believe it or not, against a pierogi outlet called Hunky Bill's. And they didn't like the company using Hunky because it was viewed as derogatory towards Ukrainians. Well, they lost that battle. We weren't surprised, but we did a story on it. And then to make a long story short, we would take all of those interviews, edit them down, and we would distribute them across Canada to different Ukrainian radio programs. We would also use it on Nash Holis at CKCU FM in Carleton. And then a lot of that material ended up in the National Archives of Canada, thanks to a good buddy of ours called Miron Momrek, who worked there. So it was really an interesting current way to document what was happening in the Ukrainian community, what kind of cool things Ukrainians were up to, history of Ukrainians on the prairies, that sort of thing.
That's really interesting. And going back to I'm blanking on what you were discussing before. You know what? We'll keep going.
It's okay. Okay. So let me just so I'll talk about some of the things we did with that Multicultural Media Skills Development Project. Is that it was really, really important for us 10 years after Video SUSK in the early 70s to go across Canada and document what Ukrainians were doing, but also why the Ukrainian community was kind of oversized for its size. And what I mean by that is, at the time, we had the English, we had the French, and we had all the other 5 or 6 big ethnic groups called other. So the Ukrainian community was one of the big 5 or 6. And the reason we were so prominent, I think, was because we had a lot of just really smart people. We had passionate people, very committed people in the Hromada. And SUSK was part of that. You know, the other thing I'd say is that Ukrainians sometimes like to compare themselves to other communities, like the Jewish community, and they'll say, why aren't we like them? Well, the one area where we do compete very well, I think, is in the media, at least in those days. We had a lot of young, talented Ukrainians in mainstream media. And that was a big reason why I think the Ukrainian community has such a strong voice back then. And I know I'm jumping ahead of myself, but I'm going to talk about what tips for current students. But one of them is that's an area where, if you can, get really, really involved in media, because it's so important to have a voice, to give the community a voice, to highlight issues that we care about. And going back to what I was talking about when I was spokesperson for UNICEF for the OSCE, is I could go in front of worldwide media and say, well, today I'd like to talk about what's going on in Ukraine, the polio outbreak there, or the measles outbreak there, and really highlight that and bring it to the top of the news agenda. So that's why we need to have people in places like that.
Very helpful. As well, you mentioned SUSK in the US. It's interesting that, 1980s, they were a bit dormant, and you were working on bringing them, I guess, out of dormancy, get them more active by inviting them to Congress. So that's something we're working on this year as well. If anyone's watching this and can tell us that SUSK is not dormant, please let us know. But we're hoping to invite them to our congresses and get them involved as well.
Yeah, that's really great. And you may, if there's no national coordinating body like SUSK, you may have to do it bilaterally to individual student clubs in different American universities, because in our time, SUSK was, without offending anyone, really a small group of people, but with a long shadow. So, but what a real students movement is like in SUSK, as an example, it's a real students union. It has real clubs. It holds normal events, regular events. So it's really active. What we tried to do is we tried to take the adrenaline we had at the time and give them a shot in the arm down in the United States and say, look, this is what you can do. And I think they got really excited, and that's why they'd come up and attend our congresses and things like that. But I have to say, at that time, SUSK was very politicized, divided in terms of right-wing and left-wing sectors of the Ukrainian community, unlike in Canada, where I thought we were a lot more united at the time.
Right, that's interesting. I'm going to jump to the last question, and I know you had started on this, but I'm sure you have more tips. But do you have any tips for current students related to SUSK, Ukrainian community, or just general career tips?
Sure. Well, one of them is to do what I did, is get involved early and get as involved you can, because I know we all have responsibilities, whether it's jobs or whether it's, getting our university degrees. But I can tell you from personal experience being involved in SUSK, I mean, that was a separate university for me. I learned so much. It was very draining. It was very distracting from my studies, but I did eventually get my degree. But I think I just turned out that much of a better person for it. And I enumerated earlier on some of the leadership skills that we developed at that time. The other two pieces of information I cannot overstate enough. And number one is develop a network. Develop a network of people, whether it's actually someone you physically reach out to or even on LinkedIn, because these are people who you will have access to later on in life, who could be very helpful to you, whether you're looking for a job, developing a career, trying to build a small business, whatever, you need a network. Equally important is to find yourself a mentor as early as you can. I actually have two. Actually, both of them turn out to be Ukrainian, one in the US and one in Canada. They've been of immense help to me on almost a daily basis. It doesn't matter how old you are. You can have an older mentor, you can even have a peer mentor, but these are people that you can also run to in times of trouble. Visit Ukraine, even if it's for vacation. That's another tip, because I think it makes a big difference to your identity if you actually go there now. And it's really important for Ukrainians to see that Ukrainians are coming and they know the culture, they know the language, and they want to help Ukraine. Learn Ukrainian or learn a second language. I don't know. I don't care what it is. Volunteer as much as you can, because that's also giving back, I think. And for example, I volunteer on a number of boards, and I also volunteer for something really cool called the Op-Ed Project. It's a New York-based organization that helps aspiring, mostly females actually, end up on the editorial pages of major newspapers, because it's really important to have a voice there. It's another thing to do is to get internships. For example, during the summer, I worked for next to nothing at the Globe and Mail, but I got so many contacts there and so much experience as well. The other thing I'm going to say is, I hope everyone takes this or listens to this very carefully. I did work in the United Nations for quite a number of years, mostly with UNICEF, but also WHO. And I could count on one hand the number of Ukrainians I would meet. We need to get more Canadians in the UN. We need to get more Ukrainian Canadians in there. We need to get more Ukrainians in there, because you can be very influential in places like UNICEF and places like the World Health Organization. There are also other multilateral organizations like the OSCE I mentioned. There are NGOs like Save the Children. And then election monitoring. There are so many elections, not only in Ukraine, but in different countries around the world. And Canada actually selects Canadians and sends them overseas to monitor elections. It's a really good way to get involved. Finally, we're kind of in a new normal and with the COVID pandemic. It's something I follow very closely, and I sympathize with all you young folks out there, because you're really having to adapt. So one thing I'll say is, and you've probably done it already, embrace technology, treat it as a friend, leverage it as much as you can to connect yourself in terms of these types of lockdowns and inability to travel. Sharpen your presentation skills as much as possible, because for the next foreseeable future, we're going to be talking and communicating like you and I are right now over a screen. So there's special skills involved, I think, in terms of presenting and getting your message across. And then also look at lockdowns or this time when we're not traveling much as a time to go through your to-do list and to do things that you haven't had time for, whether it's reading books, learning a second language. If you have special skills, share them with other people. You can get involved in training. So, and finally, we all love to travel, I take it. If you are going to travel, you're going to have to travel very carefully, choose your trips carefully, because you're not going to be able to do it as often as we used to. So it's nice to go to a beach or whatever, but maybe the wise thing to do now is to go to a place where you can go on a beach, but also go to a place like Tanzania, for instance, where after you did your beach bumming, you can go volunteer or help people, or at least learn about different surroundings. So don't look at this as a negative, the COVID or the lockdowns. Look at it as positive, as an opportunity. And my big wish for SUSK and all the students out there is that this will pass. You'll be able to go back to life as close as we knew it as normal, but that you make the most of it.
Thank you. Dzulynsky. Thanks for all those tips. It was really interesting hearing you speak, and I'm sure other students will, or anyone watching will find it interesting as well.
Thank you. And anyone can reach out to me. My website is michaelbociurkiw.com, and you can read my stuff on cnn.com/opinion. And I forgot to mention one more thing. I apologize. Just before the pandemic hit, I started a podcast on geopolitical events called Global Impact. And it comes up new episodes almost every week. Just yesterday, I uploaded a new episode. It was an interview with the president of one of the most influential organizations in the world, the International Committee of the Red Cross. But a lot of my podcasts deal with Ukraine or touches on them. So I'm hoping you can enjoy it and subscribe to that too.
And I know we have, we'll be including your website as part of the description when we post. And I know you have a tab there about the podcast, correct?
Yeah, I do.
Correct, yeah, so that, well, everyone will be able to access that. Well, again, Dzulynsky, Slava Ukraini, Heroям Slava.
Heroям Slava, Slava Ukraini. До побачення.
Побачення.